Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio with contributions by Elvin Freites is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.
Fierce Education targets higher education leaders, administrators, and faculty, and those driving technology adoption decisions in this new blended learning world. Go to www.fierceeducation.com for all the latest news, tips, and successful case studies of what higher education institutions are doing to better student engagement, ensure equal access, and improve the assessment process. That's www.fierceeducation.com. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. Dr. Joe Salustio back with you again. I will tell you guys that in the preface of my book that I have coming up with Kate Colbert called Commencement, the beginning of an era, new era in higher. I can't even talk today, you guys. Oh my gosh. Let me try that again. The beginning of a new era in higher education, of course, formed by the insights of 100 plus college and university presidents. It's going to be out in a month from now. It might be out soon after this episode releases. Anyway, getting back to my point, when I say that I'm here on every episode, that's true. I've said this intro about over 500 times now. In my sleep, I say, "Welcome back, everybody." And I go through the whole thing in my sleep with different improvements that I should make or don't make. Anyway, it's a whole thing, you guys. I don't expect any of you to understand, but when you say something so many times over and over and over, it begins to seep in your dreams. In your dreams, I see EdUp hashtags, EdUp everywhere. Anyway, enough about me. Let me bring in my guest because we're going to have an important conversation. Somebody that I've been trying to get on this mic, and she's done everything she could to avoid me, but I've gotten my hooks into her now. Ladies and gentlemen, here she is, my guest co-host for the day. Her name is Kathleen Henry Manzo, and she's the Executive Vice President of Education, Labor, and Economy Practice at Hager Sharp. And Kathleen, you're also the former Managing Editor at Education Week. Welcome to the EdUp Experience.
Thank you so much. And, I can't imagine that the EdUp Experience isn't in everyone's dreams, Joe.
You're so kind, Kathleen. You're so kind. Yeah, I'll tell you what, that may be true, but only because I've forced it by doing 500 episodes of this podcast. Right. Anyway, thanks for being here. You excited to co-host with me?
I am really excited. I have not co-hosted a podcast before. I've done all kinds of other media, but this is a first.
Well, I'm glad that we could be here. Now you're going to go on and start your own podcast. Who knows what's going to come of it? But we got a lot to do, and we've got a lot of ground to cover today with our guest. I'm going to hit the applause button, and you're going to hear me talk really fast because his title's really long. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, he's Dr. Jason Taylor, who's Director of the Collaborative Higher Education Research and Policy and an Associate Professor for, let me hit it again, and an Associate Professor for Educational Leadership at the University of Utah. Jason, what's going on?
Hey, good afternoon.
I need a longer applause button, I think.
Yeah, that's the most applause I've received in a while, so I appreciate it.
Happened 2 times in a row. What's going on? How are you?
I'm great.
You're here to talk to us about a one heck of a report that you were involved in that is all about dual credit and dual enrollment. And what is dual enrollment and why is dual enrollment and what's the equity around dual enrollment? Can you talk to us about this report? What's it called? Why did you decide to do this study? And then we'll start to get into the insights.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And I think, your question there prompted one of the most confusing things in this space, which is what term do we use? Is it dual credit, dual enrollment? Some states call it concurrent enrollment, and that in and of itself creates a lot of confusion. But the broad idea is we're talking about high school students taking college courses. And so I've been studying dual enrollment for a while. I wrote my dissertation on it back in 2013 and have continued to study it. And a small group of folks have been studying it over the past few decades. But as it turns out, there's the number of students taking dual enrollment, which, by the way, I'll use the term dual enrollment just to refer broadly to the phenomenon of high school students taking college courses. But as it turns out, the number of students taking dual enrollment has just grown exponentially over the past couple decades. We write this in the report, which I'll talk a little bit about here, but 1 in 10 high school students right now is taking a college course. So it's really, no longer a small phenomenon. And some national data tell us that about a third of students, by the time they graduate high school, they're going to graduate with dual enrollment credit. So long story short, myself and my colleague, Alex Perry, who runs the College and High School Alliance, we were sort of brainstorming about, the need for more data and research on dual and concurrent enrollment as it's grown, particularly related to sort of research that speaks to equitable dual enrollment. And so, we brought together a group of researchers and leaders in the field to take stock of what we know about dual enrollment from the research and the evidence, and really map out a future research agenda for dual enrollment. And so the report that you mentioned, Joe, it was released in July, and it's called Research Priorities for Advancing Equitable Dual Enrollment Policy and Practice, co-authored by the really outstanding group of researchers who went on this journey with me over the past couple of years. And informed by, some really smart and bright and talented educational policy and practice leaders in the field. And it's a 110-page report, but we summarize sort of some primary conclusions from the evidence in the report. And then we really map out 5 priorities for future scholarship and research that we think the field needs to answer in order to move the needle on equitable dual enrollment policy and practice.
Okay, all right. That's, so many questions, right? When you talk about dual, and you're right, I did do it, right? What did I say? Dual credit, and then I messed up and said dual enrollment to correct myself. But it is, some of these terms that we use within higher education are so interchangeable. Like, depending on who you're talking to and the level of knowledge that they have, they can wield these terms from a position of strength or one of complete weakness. And you're like, what the heck are they talking about? And you got to figure out, what our vernacular is and who said what and what did they mean. But dual enrollment, to your point, of the number of, in this case, the number of high school students receiving credit also in college is seems like a growing phenomenon for sure. And one that does lower the overall cost of education, which is why I think it is increasing in popularity. Is this one of the most important or significant findings in the report? This is an important takeaway from, why students look at dual enrollment, or why high schools or why colleges want to engage in it?
Yeah, great question. And I think I think why dual enrollment, one of the important reasons why dual enrollment has grown is because, it lowers the cost for a lot of students. Now, that's not the case everywhere. And, we talk about this in the report. State policy really drives dual enrollment practice at the local level. In some states, like, the state that I live in Utah, the state legislature has set a max of $5 per credit for dual enrollment. Well, that's not the case in a lot of other states. I lived in Illinois and grew up in Illinois, lived there for a long time. In Illinois, the cost is unregulated. Some students might pay the full price of tuition for dual enrollment. So there's a lot of variation. And I think there's certainly more, folks, I think realize that cost can be a real barrier for a lot of students, particularly low-income first-gen students who might not be able to afford dual enrollment tuition. So, yeah, it does save students money in many cases, and it saves students time. in a lot of cases as well, right? They can get a head start on college. And, a lot of the qualitative research when we talk to students, dual enrollment students, that's one of the things they tell us most often, right? Is, I can get started. I can save money, and I can maybe get through college a little faster.
Right, that's important. Kathleen, what do you think about all this? You've read this report or been involved in it, and it can really connected us with Jason. I know you've got a lot that you want to bring up.
Yeah. So I was really excited when the Joyce Foundation asked me to work with Jason and the team of researchers to help promote this white paper, which, I think does a pretty extensive, maybe the most extensive job to date around what the research says, and more importantly, what it doesn't say, and we need to know. And, in my career as a journalist, I covered higher ed at Community College Week and diverse issues in higher education, and then K-12 at Education Week for a lot of years. And dual
over 20 years, I think, right?
Yeah, for a couple of decades. I was very, very young when I started.
Amazing.
And dual enrollment always fascinated me. I visited programs around the country. So it surprised me in working with Jason that there wasn't, even though there's a lot of research, that there were gaps in the research, and that what we do know wasn't, as robust perhaps as we need to know, given that this, is one of the potential ways to, get kids on that path to college, and, maybe even motivate kids and boost those college enrollments because they've had that prior experience.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we highlight in the report right at the beginning, and Kathleen highlighted this, the evidence is crystal clear. Dual enrollment helps students transition out of high school and into college and careers. And that's probably, sort of the place where where the evidence is most compelling, right? Study after study has shown that, getting a start on college and high school is going to help you succeed in college on average. And the big caveat for that, which, sort of I alluded to this earlier, is that, those outcomes aren't equal. So we see really big disparities in access and success. Yikes. Right. So that's why we did this paper, right? We see huge disparities in dual enrollment access by race, ethnicity, by income, by first generation status. So, we know that dual enrollment is like one of the most important mechanisms and strategies for transitioning students into college, but not all students can access it.
Fierce Education is the place where higher education leaders, administrators, and faculty, and those driving technology adoption decisions in education can access proven methods and best practices as they rethink pedagogy and business models in the new blended learning world. Through its website, www.fierceeducation.com, virtual events, and newsletters, Fierce Education focuses on rethinking higher education in a blended learning world. Fierce Education's key tenets are to use technology for teaching better and reaching learners everywhere, addressing business model changes required to move forward, and workforce preparation for adult learners who are out to reskill. That's www.fierceeducation.com. Kathleen, you have another one you want to
Yeah.
before I start taking over?
Yeah, well, I will just butt in again and say, also, during my years as a journalist, one of the things that always came up is this lack of sufficient coordination between K-12 and especially secondary education and higher ed. And, how that, conversation and collaboration can really help, make more of a seamless system, and perhaps, higher ed can support secondary educators and students and parents in understanding what are some of these pathways. And, I see dual enrollment, and Jason, I'd love to hear your perspective on how dual enrollment can be one of those mechanisms for, creating more of this seamless environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that, and Kathleen, certainly you've done covered a lot of this. Full disclosure, I've never worked for a dual enrollment program or, sort of led one. I mostly approach this topic as a researcher, but I think, it's not easy to work across our big educational systems, right? We're siloed in sort of K-12 and higher ed systems. And I think some of the strongest, I'd say, outcomes that we see in dual enrollment is where we see close partnerships between high schools and colleges. I always point to early college high schools. If folks are familiar with those, they're not in every state, but some states like North Carolina and others have really invested in them. And the idea is that we're really reforming a high school to focus on sort of college readiness, and dual enrollment is one component of early college high school, an early college high school model, but it requires such close collaboration and coordination between a college and a high school, and evidence is really strong that those students, many of whom are low income students of color, first generation. That's sort of the target population for many early colleges, but the evidence shows those high schools really help students access college, prepare them for college, and help them transition into college after high school because of the really strong, coordination and collaboration that between high school and college leaders.
Jason, one of the things that I think is really critical about this conversation about dual credit is who the heck promotes the thing. I mean, I've been involved in some dual credit programs, and so I have some of this knowledge firsthand, but there's a lot of confusion. Let me restart that question, but there's a lot of confusion, right? When you have dual credit classes and the college changes its curriculum and they've got to communicate it to the high school, they got to make sure that it's right. The curriculum has to map so that you can give credit for it. So there's all the whole Carnegie unit thing that's involved. There's another piece that's like, how do you promote it? Who's sending the students in these classes? Is it the high school? Is it the college that prepares in and, just students roll up into it? Did your research take a look at how students are entering into dual credit? Is it just kind of plopped in front of them by a high school advisor saying, you should do this too? Because one of the parts I find fascinating about the report is the bit about how the experience in the dual credit course can really affect that person's path and experience in terms of self-confidence toward college, right? Because if they have a bad experience, in one part of the country, dual credit is giving you great experience, you're more likely to persist into college. But if it's a dual credit experience, if they fail a dual credit course, is that more likely that they will not go to college, right? So there's a lot of questions around who's in control of it, who promotes it, how do students enter it? I think that's more than one question, but you take it the best way you know how.
Well, I think that's a really great question. I mean, in terms of who, like even a broader question, like how do students learn about dual enrollment or dual credit, right? How do they come to learn about it? I mean, one of the answers that we talk about a lot in this space is that it depends, right? Because there's 50 states and 50 state policies. Some states require local sort of high schools to do direct outreach and promote dual enrollment, but I think, and others don't, but I think what you generally find is the high school sort of often, will lead some of the recruitment and outreach materials or strategies. But in other states, and in some localities, the college, particularly programs that are offered on the college campus, the college will sort of provide leadership in that space. But either way, I think, the big thing that we highlight in the report is the access gap. We still have really big access gaps for dual enrollment. one of our priorities for future research is around how parents and communities and families influence whether students participate in dual enrollment. We really don't have a lot of good evidence or research that tells us about the role of families and parents. I always point to an NCS study that was, I forget which longitudinal study it was a part of, but one of the, maybe NELS, I think, or ELS, but one of the questions they asked high school students in that study is, who has the biggest influence on your education and career decisions?
Huh?
And guess who it's not? It's not counselors, it's not teachers, it's families. I think upwards of like 50% of students said that the number one influence on their future, sort of education and career plans were their families, their parents.
Yeah, I if I could just jump in, this
Please.
is really resonating with me because as the mother of two kids who not that long ago were in high school and have continued into higher education, in a very high performing school district in this nation, and as someone who, understands the landscape, I always knew dual enrollment would be a great opportunity for my kids, and the school, had it as a priority, and I'm in communications too. I got to say, it was a very complex and confusing process. And even someone like me was trying to help my kids navigate it. We did not take advantage of those opportunities because I don't know, the stars did not align for various reasons.
Confused. And it's confusing. That gets back to my original point, like who communicates it and how do kids find out about it? And, to your point, Jason, and you make a good one too, Kathleen, it's like the parents want to be involved. They're definitely involved. I think parents, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, in where the student goes to college. And we find, when we're just enrolling students here at Lindenwood and the parents are there, I mean, the parents have a great influence over the student. Sometimes in higher ed, one of our big complaints in higher ed is that, not every school gets equal treatment. You go here because your parents went there, or you go here because this happens to be in your region, or you heard so-and-so's mom and dad say that this was a good school, so you go there. But there is a communication issue, which, Jason, going back to the equities, when you talk about equity in this process, there is a inference that there is inequity. The way you were saying it before, like there is an inequity in this process for dual credit. How is it communicated in a way that creates, how can we communicate it in a way that, and I say dual credit because I'm one of those people that seems to throw this around as an interchangeable term, apparently. The dual enrollment, how does it communicated at scale to help the disadvantaged, the economically, the people who are in economic disadvantage, or those coming from, socioeconomic backgrounds that are in the lower economic quartiles?
Yeah, well, it's okay to use the terms interchangeably, Joe, because I think sometimes they are. It's hard to decipher between terms and models, but I wish I had like the perfect answer to your question. I think, one of the things that seems obvious is that, we need to, colleges, I think, need to be more involved and more proactive. And maybe this goes back to the question about partnerships, Kathleen, right? Like how can colleges, embed themselves, particularly with at the local level, right? Like how can they really partner to, make sure all high school students are aware. And I think maybe there's some creative solutions with technology, which is not my area of expertise, but, it doesn't, we look at young people these days and everyone's on their phone, right? Like how can we reach students via technology? And then the other thing that I think, there's a couple states innovating with sort of auto enrollment approaches, a lot of states and, or localities, students have to apply for dual enrollment, but really a school district and a college, they know which students are eligible that meet meet eligibility criteria, why not auto enroll them, and then let the student have a conversation with their family, and let a student have a conversation with their family and counselor about whether this is the right choice, and they sort of have to opt out. But to your earlier point, Joe, we do, students might have a negative experience in dual enrollment program, and that has all sorts of implications. If a student fails a course, it has all sorts of implications for a college transcript and financial aid. So there's ways to, put some safeguards in place so students aren't negatively affected in the future. But those are a couple ideas.
Kathleen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I did want to just make a note that one of the things that excited me about supporting this work is that you think, oh, white paper, oh, this is something that's going to sit on the shelf or just be in your reading queue forever. But there was a real intent behind this to make it a catalyst and an ongoing conversation. And I'd love for Jason to talk about the research agenda and why it's important that this raised the alarms or at least motivations for researchers, for policymakers, for leaders of institutions, and even educators to realize this is a huge untapped well of opportunity, perhaps, but for some of these remaining questions and that commitment going forward rather than it just being like oh, did that, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, well, so, this is a higher ed audience. And, so if you're in higher ed and, I teach in a higher ed leadership program, we have hundreds and thousands of studies on concepts like student engagement, now sense of belonging. We actually have so much evidence on college access, right? To your point earlier, Joe, we've got a lot of research on the college choice process, right? What we don't have a lot of evidence on is dual enrollment, relatively speaking, right? Yet when we talk about the growth and significance of dual enrollment, I think our research community, whether that be higher ed researchers or maybe K-12 researchers, we've not kept up with the field, right? So to Kathleen's point, I think, it's our hope that this agenda really, is a catalyst and inspires, both those studying, K-12 or higher ed, to really invest some time in dual enrollment so we can figure out how to do it better, because policy and practice is moving, and it's going to continue to move in ways that it wants to until we have sort of some stronger evidence that sort of tells us what we should be doing and why for dual enrollment. So yeah, I'm hopeful we'll inspire some folks who maybe haven't been thinking about dual enrollment to think about it more seriously.
Yeah, Jason, I want to jump on that, Kathleen, if I could, and kind of ask the same question. I'm going to actually read you guys, if I'm okay to do this, or read one of the findings.
It's your show, Joe.
Oh, I can do whatever I want. Okay.
Yeah.
Was that permissioned?
Yes. Yeah.
What the evidence tells us, this section of the report, because what you guys are talking about is kind of scary, right? And I say it like this: dual enrollment, good. Yes, we love it. It's awesome. Alongside that, we have to increase the equity for it, maybe how it communicates, people access it. Simultaneously, higher ed is reaching its tentacles into high schools more than ever, right? Because we know that population of students is drying up. So higher ed institutions are doing everything possible to try to engage the students really at a younger and younger age for a couple of reasons, right? Because we need more students in higher ed. So many institutions are in trouble or will be in trouble when the CARES funding and the HERF funds go away. But also because, you want to communicate your brand and you want to get them involved and you want to let them know to continue, really to continue. All right. So anyway, a lot of reasons why those things are happening simultaneously. And then I was reading the report, and this is the thing that boggled my mind. This is the part where I'm like, oh, wow, this is really something. I'm going to read it right now. It says, okay, this is me the reading. This is like my Amazon practice for when my book comes out, and I'm going to do like the audiobook. Research on teaching and learning in the dual enrollment classroom is limited, but the existing research suggests that dual enrollment classes and instruction do not precisely reflect the high school or college experience and environment. Rather, they are in a liminal, and I had to look that up, space that requires dual enrollment instructors to navigate multiple education systems, cultures, and norms. So immediately I'm like painting this picture of the person who's teaching this dual credit course stuck between high school and college curriculum, delivery, probably not supported in the way that I should. I've got these brains that I'm trying to mold and get them ready for college, and maybe I'm just not, I don't have the resources I need to do it in the right way. That's kind of a scary thing. Is you look at a dual enrollment, more kids maybe entering, putting more students, from diverse backgrounds into those dual enrollment courses. Same time, higher ed reaching down into high schools to get those students at a younger age, and ending up in this course where your faculty is towing the line, so to speak. That's a really, that's a phenomenon that has to be explored, don't you think? Was that just like a question that took 9 years for me to get out? I feel like it was a big setup.
Hey, like Kathleen said, it's your show, so you can,
half the audience turned off.
Interesting part of the exploration, though, I think.
All right, Jason, you got to respond to all that nonsense that I just was.
Well, I think ever since I've been studying dual enrollment, and I think we hear it today too, there's this desire for dual enrollment classrooms to perfectly mirror the college environment. And I think what some of the research particularly the research on teaching and learning, sort of what happens in the classroom and faculty, it doesn't tell us that it's precisely the college environment. And it doesn't tell us that it's the high school environment either. It's as, Christine Denneker, who is one of the authors of the paper who wrote in more depth about this piece, sort of really picked up on this liminal space. And I think that makes some people uncomfortable, myself included, right? Because we do have these two more clearly defined systems, but there is this middle space that it's not governed by two sets of policies. It's really a gray space. So we need more research in that area. And it's really, it varies. I think, you've heard me say probably the third time I've said this, there's a lot of state variation. So some states have standards in place in state policy or via NACEP accreditation that, really help, that really are intended to support faculty teaching and provide sort of quality instruction. And I think, we need a little bit more evidence around how those systems work and how effective they are.
All right, Kathleen, you get one more shot to slip in a question here before I close out this episode.
I would wonder, Jason, after doing this very thorough research review and now, call to action, so to speak, to the field, what do you see as the future of dual enrollment, or where do you think your interests are going to go next?
Yeah, I think dual enrollment's growing clearly. There might be, we might be leveling off a little bit in some sectors. And I think, the pandemic and some other things have certainly disrupted some of the trends in some ways. But, I think, Joe, maybe I think your earlier question probably alluded to this, but I do think, higher ed blending in with K-12, I see that continuing to occur. And so how can, I'd love to see, state, particularly state policy, but also federal policy, really think about this more deliberately, because I don't think it's slowing down. In fact, one of the Department of Ed, they have a new pathways team, and one of their 4 priorities is dual enrollment. That's the U.S. Department of Ed, that is. So
wonderful.
I don't think it's slowing down. I think, we're going to see more focus on, getting high school students into college opportunities in high school. And I mean, to your question, Kathleen, I think, what we need, and we've done a little bit of work around this, but we need the philanthropic community and funders to sort of, invest in both policy and research, policy practice and research, right? So, if we're going to do dual enrollment, we need to do it right. We need to figure out how it's affordable, how it's equitable, how it's meaningful
100%.
and intentional for students. Yeah. We throw around this term. You'll hear it a lot, Joe, if you listen, maybe you've heard it in your context, but, sort of random acts of dual enrollment. We've grown quite a bit, but how do we get high school students in more meaningful and intentional sequences and pathways of dual enrollment courses? So lots of innovative policies and practices to explore. And as a researcher and as folks who are trying to do good, sort of produce high quality evidence, we need folks to fund and support that research as well.
I've got to interrupt the broadcast here.
Attention.
What I love about having first-time guest co-host on is that they sometimes steal my questions.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
What do you see as the future of dual enrollment was my final question, but since Kathleen asked it already, that's what makes for a great episode, Jason. I want to give you a chance to plug yourself on the way out, talk about your work that you're doing at the University of Utah, the CHIRP, the Collaborative for Higher Education Research and Policy, anything you want to say about the university and the work you're doing, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. I just want to thank you and just encourage folks who are, studying and doing work at the intersection of higher ed and what it could be K-12, it could be the workforce. I think, to the extent that we think across systems is super important, because we got to help our students navigate those systems and those transitions. And yeah, University of Utah is a fabulous place to work and study education policy in higher ed. So thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. First, before I outro my guest, I've got to go to my guest co-host, Kathleen. How did you feel about your first co-hosted episode of the EdUp Experience?
It was very fun, painless, and I think I want to do it again.
And I think you did a darn good job. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest co-host today, KKM, a.k.a. Kathleen Kennedy Manzo, a.k.a. she's the Executive Vice President of Education, Labor and Economy Practice at Hager Sharp, and the former Managing Editor of Education Week. By the way, 20 years of incredible work at Education Week. I encourage everybody, if you are connected to higher education, you need to find Kathleen and connect with her on LinkedIn. She knows everybody. She does great work. And we appreciate you here at the EdUp Experience, Kathleen. Thanks for all your support and
Thank
help.
you. Love the podcast. It'll be in my dreams tonight.
I feel bad for anybody that hears me. Welcome back, everybody. All right. And of course, our guest today, he's on the spot recalling 111 pages of research, which not many people can do. I had to look up some of the words in the executive summary because I'm like, what the heck does that mean? So you're a better man than I. Here he is, Dr. Jason Taylor, Director of the Collaborative for Higher Education Research and Policy, CHIRP, and Associate Professor for Educational Leadership at the University of Utah. Jason, did you have a good EdUp experience today?
I had a fabulous experience. My first podcast also. So
all right.
Today it was an adventure and I enjoyed it. Thanks, Joe.
Yes. Put your hands up in the air.
That's our celebration on the way out. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, by Kate Colbert and Joe Salustio, with contributions by Elvin Freites, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. Get your Kindle edition or your softbound book. It's going to be
amazing.